Today's Sports Law Academy session is all about financial regulation in sport, and football in particular. It's an area that's proven to be particularly contentious in recent years, but it's one that we know well, having been involved in some of the most high-profile disputes involving financial regulations in sport. We are honoured to be joined by some amazing speakers ranging from leading barristers, academics, leagues and regulators, which will be chaired by our very own Tom Murray, who, alongside others in our team, contributed to the chapter on financial regulation in the leading football law textbook. It's sure to be a memorable evening.
In this evening's event, we're going to be looking back on the key developments in the financial regulation of football over the past 12 months. We're going to be talking about the government white paper in response to the fan-led review, the future of women's football review, Manchester City being charged for breaching the Premier League rules, La Liga's economic controls, plans to create a European Super League, and the EFL's new club financial reporting unit. So let's get started with what is, without a doubt, probably the most significant development over the past 12 months, which is the government white paper in response to the fan-led review, and this was published just over 2 weeks ago now. So just as a reminder, the fan-led review of football governance was prepared by Tracy Crouch, MP, now CBE, and was published in November 2021. So this sets out 10 key strategic recommendations, which are part of 47 wider recommendations in total. The government then responded to this fan-led review by publishing its white paper. And in terms of next steps, the white paper is currently undergoing a 4-week targeted consultation. So this is much quicker than you'd normally expect to see for white papers. The intention then is for a piece of narrowly drawn legislation to be drawn up, which will be establish the creation of the regulator. And as things stand, the expectation is that the regulator will be set up in time for the 2024 season. So Nick, perhaps you could get started by giving an overview of the white paper and its proposals.
Yeah, well, I think it is the most important development in probably sports regulation, certainly football regulation, for decades. It's a particularly important subject we're dealing with today, financial regulation, but generally speaking, to have the first independent statutory regulator with statutory powers of a sport and of our biggest national sport is an extremely significant development. And I have no doubt at the moment that it will happen. The question is much more the scope of its powers that is up for discussion rather than whether it will happen or not.
We've got 115 charges. I've not got enough time to go through all 115, so I'll narrow it down to effectively to 3 broad areas. I mentioned earlier that financial fair play is a profit-based or break-even based model. That's income less costs equals profit or loss. Now, if I wanted to address that, if I wanted to manipulate that system, I'd focus on 2 areas, and that's the accusation that's been made against Manchester City. First of all, in terms of revenue, the accusation, the allegations are that the revenues have been inflated. Football clubs get their income from 3 sources. Broadcasting, which is effectively set by UEFA and the Premier League itself, so there's no scope for addressing those numbers. Match day, which is number of matches times average ticket price times capacity of the ground. So that as a natural ceiling. And it's fairly easy for the regulatory authorities to review those figures because they know the prices, they see the capacity of the ground, and they can do the sums fairly easily. So commercial income is the one area where there is scope for the football club itself to boost those revenues through a variety of sources. The accusation that's been made against Manchester City is broadly that Manchester City have sold commercial and sponsorship deals and have received significant sums, but those monies have actually come from equity investors. They've come from the owners of the club and have been diverted and reclassified as commercial income. Equity investments are capped as to the amount of money you can put in over a 3-year period, whereas commercial revenues have not.
So a couple of people have pointed out that the Premier League statement that they released in relation to these charges had some errors in it. So there's some cross-referencing errors in terms of the Premier League's own thorough handbook, and the suggestion is that the reason for this was that the Premier League were kind of trying to rush their charges to get them out before the original deadline for the white paper to be released. That was obviously then pushed back a couple of weeks. Is this a risk that you think the Premier League and also the EFL are alive to in terms of trying to placate and show to government that actually they can take their own regulations seriously and they are willing to take action?
Can't really speak for the Premier League and so on, but from the EFL's point of view, I'm aware, I've not been involved in all of the discussions, but I'm aware there are discussions between the EFL and DCMS, so there's a rough idea as to when the white paper would land or was likely to land and so on. I think from the EFL's point of view, we've tried to pursue things as diligently as we can, independently of that. We've tried to address concerns that were raised in the fan-led review off our own back from our own internal reviews as well. Whilst I recognise it's easy to draw inferences or highlight, well, maybe they're trying to rush things out and so on, I think possibly that's a little bit unfair at times. I think sometimes it's just what it is sometimes, and yeah, we're all guilty of making the occasional typo and so on, myself included.
I think the reform I would put through is some form of financial regulation to reduce the gaps both within individual divisions and between divisions. That will stop the willingness and the opportunity to gamble with the futures of football clubs, turns down the dial, stops people from overspending, which is happening with so many clubs at present, and that's putting the future of individual clubs at risk.
For me, it's those reforms about transparency, which include in this case the right to challenge the decision of the regulator itself in open court. For far too long, a lot of key decisions in sport that affect everybody and have a big public interest are made behind closed doors and without transparent processes. And one of the key things that are combined in a number of the recommendations in the white paper are to have more transparent, consistent processes.
The biggest risk I see from the white paper is that I don't think it's strong enough on equality, diversity and inclusion in football. And I hope it will do more, and that the legislation and whatever follows next will do a little bit more on this. The biggest opportunity is that I do think it will de-risk football to a certain extent. It's very clear to say it won't completely prevent club insolvencies, but I suspect we will see fewer of them.
John, I'd love for you to speak a bit more about the EFL's new model that is introduced, the Club Financial Reporting Unit. Could you just give a brief overview of what the unit does, what its roles and responsibilities are, and why it was introduced?
It all comes out of an internal review that took place in 2021. And one of the recommendations from that review was that this independent team would be set up to address the concerns around conflicts of interest and the speed of resolutions. That independent team would then report into a different club financial review panel on all the different compliance issues it identified. Well, the unit has had all the powers that the EFL normally would have had over the financial regulations delegated to it. And so those financial regulations will be the profit and sustainability rules for the Championship, the SCMP rules which are mentioned for Leagues 1 and League 2, where clubs are allowed to spend a certain amount of their revenue on player expenditure, topped up by equity injections. And then also we look at Regulation 16, which is to do with the submission of annual accounts and also detailed financial forecasts for this season and the next season.
I work in sport business and I cover that on a regular basis, so I'm always interested to hear what the experts are saying. And there was a really good panel here tonight. I know that Mishcon always has good guests, and it delivered. It was a really interesting discussion about the way that football governance is going, and it will definitely keep me better informed in future.
Jane, obviously one of the key proposals in the white paper seems to be to design the kind of fourth threshold condition is designed to kind of kill off the European Super League. Do you think we've seen the end of that, at least for the purpose of the English clubs?
I'm not sensing a will in this country from, and I have no inside track here, it's just what I see, hear, read, whatever. I'm not sensing a will from English clubs to continue with that path. I think the reaction was so strong. I credit fans in particular. I think they were sometimes, you know, those demonstrations on the street, you look at them, they're a little bit unruly, but my God, they made their voice heard and they were right. And I still chuckle at that sign saying, I want my Tuesday nights in Stoke. It's in the DNA of English football.
There's an economic control department within La Liga, which is receiving the income statements and other statements from clubs to determine what their financial income is in a given year. They are the ones ultimately making the decision, make it based upon what they're proposing as player signings for the transfer window. There's obviously plenty of open dialogue there, but at the end of the day, we're taking the club's existing incomes. As Karen also said before, it's fairly foreseeable what you're earning in terms of audiovisual rights. Your commercials can change over time. And so we take all of those components, we decide how much the club can spend based upon their current squad cost limit, and that's where we, essentially you can imagine a button on an app that's either green or it's gray. You're in compliance, you register a player. You're in non-compliance, you're not able to register.